Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into a moment that, well, truly shook the nation, an event seared into recent memory.
You're talking about the assassination of Charlie Kirk, September 10th, 2025.
Exactly, right there at Utah Valley University. And the immediate aftermath,
Mm.
wow, it was just an explosion of raw, deeply polarized emotion.
Yeah. Unlike almost anything we've seen, some people instantly hailed him as a martyr.
While others, and this was shocking to many, were openly celebrating.
And it's clear, isn't it, that stark division wasn't just about one person.
No, not at all. It felt like a brutal reflection of these deep fractures already running through our society. It really forces us to confront some tough questions about ourselves, about where we are.
Which is exactly what we need to tackle today. Our mission here is to try and truly understand how such extreme polarization takes root.
Right. Why were people so incredibly drawn to his message? And, ultimately, how can we objectively assess whether legacies like his lead towards harmony or towards division? For humanity as a whole, we need to cut through the noise.
That's the real challenge, isn't it? Moving beyond the purely emotional, the subjective narratives that cloud our judgment. Is there really an objective, impartial way to evaluate these incredibly complex situations? A lot of people would say no.
That is the million-dollar question. And actually, the answer we're exploring today is yes, there is. We're going to introduce you to a system, a concept really, that offers precisely that.
Way to cut through the noise.
Exactly. A powerful, objective way. It's a system using mathematics and algorithms, hard data, to determine what is fundamentally right or wrong.
Based on what, though? Whose standard of right and wrong?
Based on universal human well-being, long-term outcomes for everyone. It presents a whole new way to see and understand these things.
Okay, that's a big claim. Let's get into it.
Let's start with the event itself, laid out clearly. September 10th, 2025. Charlie Kirk, just 31 years old, was assassinated during a Turning Point USA event at Utah Valley University.
And like you said, shockwaves.
Yeah.
Immediately, this profound national split just became glaringly obvious.
His death instantly served as this stark revealer. It pulled back the curtain on divides that were already deep within the United States.
On one side, you had his ardent supporters, especially from the MG movement, associated with former President Trump. They weren't just mourning.
No, they were calling for vengeance, hailing him as a martyr.
They genuinely saw him, it seems, as a champion for free speech, for American values, embodying what they called the American spirit of debate.
And then the other side, celebrations, which understandably many viewed as just unchecked hate, a grim testament to the animosity his rhetoric had stirred up.
But for others, it was almost seen as a grim form of justice. It revealed just how intensely people felt about his influence, how divided the country really was and still is.
It really underscored that division.
And what makes it even more complex, even poignant, is that Kirk himself had previously warned about an assassination culture.
Yeah, I remember that. Eerily foreshadowing his own fate.
Right. Which just added another layer to the fractured public perception, deepened the complexity of his legacy.
So let's unpack that legacy, because it's absolutely crucial to understanding the division he left behind. Charlie Kirk rose incredibly fast, founded Turning Point USA at just 18.
18. And from there, quickly became this really prominent voice for America First nationalism.
An ideology prioritizing, domestic interests, a specific cultural identity over international concerns.
Along with a very particular interpretation of Christian values and just vocal opposition to progressive policies.
His core identity wasn't static, though, was it? He started maybe more focused on free market ideas.
But it decisively evolved, didn't it, into this broader far-right populism, deeply aligned with Christian nationalism and, of course, staunch support for Donald Trump.
And it was his rhetoric. That's where the seeds of hate and exclusion often seem to be sown. He consistently framed others, immigrants, Muslims, LGBTQ+ individuals, racial minorities, as existential threats.
Using fear to rally support. Take immigration. He called for a total immigration halt.
He labeled migrants invaders, endorsed using lethal force or tear gas or whips against them.
He even promoted the Great Replacement theory, that idea that Democrats are intentionally trying to diminish white demographics.
And spread those debunked claims about Haitians eating pets. I mean, his ex-posts, just 2 days before his death, September 8th, 2025, mass migration is a weapon of mass destruction. That clearly illustrates the pattern.
And when you look at that rhetoric objectively, it fosters a sense of, well, selfishness, doesn't it? Hoarding resources, protection for us, rather than universal unity.
Which inevitably leads to suffering. family separation, xenophobic violence.
And history shows this. It mirrors things like the 1920s U.S. quotas, which ultimately fueled the horrific refugee crises of World War II. Immense human pain resulted from that kind of thinking.
His Christian nationalism was just as stark, exclusionary. He declared, Islam is the sword the left is using to slit the throat of America.
And rejected the separation of church and state as a myth. He pushed the Seven Mountains Mandate.
Right, that ambitious goal for Christian dominance across all key societal sectors: government, education, media.
This isn't a call for harmony, biblical or otherwise. It's pretty clearly a form of religious supremacy.
And historically, ideologies like that echo the medieval Crusades or 20th century religious fascism.
Periods that led to centuries of wars, genocides, deep divisions, often driven by a greedy pursuit of power disguised as something spiritual.
And then, when it came to LGBTQ plus individuals, social exclusion, his stance hardened significantly over time.
Yeah, by 2024, he was calling being gay an error, likening pride celebrations to drug addiction.
And demanding Nuremberg-style trials for doctors providing gender-affirming care. That's extreme.
Extremely. And his ex-post, Democrat women want to die alone without children, also from September 8th. It's just profoundly mocking progressive values, personal choices.
And rhetoric like that demonstrably promotes suffering. You see it in the tragic statistics, like higher suicide rates among LGBTQ plus youth.
It parallels historical justifications for pain and oppression, like Jim Crow segregation using the guise of traditional values to maintain power and cause deep harm.
His racial rhetoric was equally divisive, alarmingly so, calling the Civil Rights Act a huge mistake.
Labeling Martin Luther King Jr. awful, calling diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, an anti-white weapon.
And those statements like, prowling blacks go around for fun to go target white people. I mean, even groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center labeled his statements racist, xenophobic, and extreme.
That language actively distorts history. It fosters selfishness by framing it as protecting white heritage.
And it inevitably causes suffering. It contributes to prolonged racial inequities. We saw the backlash after the Civil Rights Movement.
His rhetoric essentially created this toxic environment. And even after his death, it deepened those divides, leading to calls for vengeance, warnings of a vicious spiral of violence.
And speaking of selfishness, Kirk often positioned himself as anti-elite, against the establishment.
Right, the man of the people.
But the financial reality of Turning Point USA tells a very different story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
TPUSA's revenue hit, what, $85 million in 2024?
A staggering number, funded by wealthy conservatives. Foster Fries, Bernard Marcus, Richard Uihlein, and anonymous sources funneled through donors' trust.
So, the very people Kirk seemed to rail against, these globalist elites, were the ones funding his operation, and seemingly the ones he emulated in his own financial path. What does that tell us about the appeal, maybe, the disconnect?
It reveals a profound hypocrisy, really, right at the heart of the movement, this pattern of personal enrichment alongside the populist anti-elite talk.
His own salary rose to around $300,000 by 2020.
And he acquired that $4.75 million estate, the $855,000 condo. It's not just personal gain, it's amassing wealth while claiming to fight for the common person against the very power structures he benefited from.
And it wasn't just the money. There were scandals, misleading audits at TPUSA, self-dealing accusations.
And receiving that $1.25 million from Julie Fancelli for buses to the January 6th event.
Plus, the FEC fining TP Action $18,000 in 2024 for not disclosing donors. It's
a striking hypocrisy.
railing against globalists funded by dark money from elites.
And historically, this mirrors demagogues who profited massively from fear-mongering and division. These patterns consistently lead to widespread societal distrust and suffering, not unity.
It is unsettling how clearly these patterns repeat throughout history. Because when you examine Kirk's ideology closely,
it mirrors historical moments known for causing immense suffering, not harmony. It's like history rhyming, but with different names.
absolutely, you could draw very specific parallels. His great replacement theory, the anti-immigrant invasion talk.
It's strikingly similar to 1930s Nazi propaganda against Jews and migrants, or even 1920s U.S. nativism targeting specific groups.
And the outcomes of those movements. Catastrophic. The Holocaust, World War II refugee crises, greed-fueled wars over resources, nothing resembling unity or ethical conduct.
And his Christian nationalism, the anti-Islam rhetoric, it echoes the medieval Crusades or 20th century religious fascism like Franco's Spain.
Periods that led to centuries of war, genocide, deep divisions, empowering greedy rulers, not fostering ethical peace for everyone.
His anti-civil rights comments, the racial stereotypes, They parallel the Jim Crow South, or McCarthyism's fear tactics.
And the outcomes there. Lynching, redlining, generational poverty, all driven by a desire to maintain elite power through selfishness. The opposite of the inclusive harmony someone like Martin Luther King Jr. championed.
Even his overall divisiveness feels eerily like the pre-Civil War U.S., with the intense slavery debates, or Weimar Germany before the Nazis rose.
Situations that spiraled into catastrophe, civil war, totalitarian regimes, deepening rifts and violence. These patterns consistently show that such views, in practice, prioritize selfish preservation over global ethics, leading to pain, not benefits.
So, given all that, why? Why were so many people drawn to Charlie Kirk? Why did they see him as good, even heroic?
Because on the surface, the appeal was incredibly powerful. You have to acknowledge that. Many saw him as young, relatable, a light bringer.
A passionate defender of free speech.
Right. He undeniably inspired youth, challenged what he framed as leftist propaganda, protected traditional values, family, Christianity, American sovereignty, things many people hold dear.
And a critical point is how he framed his views, always as protective.
Explain that.
Well, he'd say borders are biblical, framing it as safeguarding Christian heritage. Gun rights were the price of liberty. Anti-DEI was fighting anti-white bias.
So it tapped into fears of cultural erosion, of change.
Exactly, making his message resonate as a kind of salvation for, as he might put it, real American.
Which brings us to the science, really. Why people were swayed. Our brains. They aren't perfect logic machines. We're all susceptible to cognitive biases.
And the power of echo chambers, confirmation bias, for example. We seek out info that confirms what we already believe. It reinforces the narrative that someone like Kirk is fighting for us.
And the bandwagon effect kicks in too, right? If everyone in your circle supports a view.
It starts to feel correct, regardless of the facts. And then social media algorithms act as these potent echo chambers, amplifying divisive messages, creating bubbles where contradictory info barely gets through. Makes it hard to see other perspectives.
It's also about how our brains prioritize. Especially under stress, we tend to go for the emotional feels-right response over careful, logical analysis.
Which makes charismatic figures really appealing. They tap into anxieties, offer simple, emotionally resonant solutions, often bypassing critical thinking.
And his rhetoric was very effective at creating that us versus them dynamic.
Very. Neuroscience shows this can manipulate anxieties about change. It creates selective empathy where supporters feel empowered and protected, while others are demonized.
Blinding people perhaps to the underlying bigotry and the potential harm his message inflicted.
It certainly makes it harder to see.
So in this world absolutely flooded with these polarized narratives, these deeply entrenched beliefs, there's this critical need for something objective, an impartial way to evaluate complex situations, complex legacies.
Which brings us back to Ethos Predict.
Exactly. Let's really define it. Ethos Predict is an advanced AI system. It's designed specifically to evaluate decisions, policies, organizations, conflicts, through a lens of absolute ethical clarity.
Okay, absolute ethical clarity. How does it define that?
It determines what is fundamentally right or wrong, based purely on the long-term outcomes for all of humanity's well-being, universal well-being.
So it tries to remove subjectivity, emotion, personal belief.
Completely. That's the key distinction. It leverages machine learning to forecast trajectories. It assesses with remarkable precision whether initial actions, maybe even ones that seem good initially, might actually devolve into harm over decades.
And its core is mathematics and algorithm.
Yes, it clears misinformation, deciphers propaganda, and provides unbiased truth with near 100% accuracy in binary classification.
Binary, meaning?
It's either right or wrong for the long-term well-being of all. It offers near-perfect clarity in that assessment, like a fundamental mathematical truth. There's no ambiguity, no maybe in its final ethical judgment based on predicted outcomes.
Okay, so how does it achieve that? What kind of math are we talking about?
Think sophisticated predictive models, tools that calculate probabilities, run countless what-if scenarios to see long-term effects decades down the line. It uses things like logistic regression, gradient descent for optimization, time series analysis like ARMA, Monte Carlo simulations for those future predictions, and even cosine similarity to detect propaganda patterns.
So these aren't just guesses, they're provable statistical methods applied to incredibly complex systems like human behavior and societal impact.
Precisely. It integrates vast data sets, real-world events tracked via GPS, news archives going back decades, Historical outcome records. It uses advanced features like bias detection, historical analogy matching like we discussed earlier, and ethical weighting to predict the probability of harmonious versus greedy or divisive results years, even decades ahead.
Can you give us that concrete example again? The Israel-Palestine conflict.
Yeah, it's a powerful illustration. As of September 13, 2025, Ethos Predict analyzed the situation. It cleared biases by matching Israeli actions to historical colonial patterns, finding an 85% similarity to things like Native American displacements.
And crucially, it predicted long-term negative outcomes. A 90% probability of escalated division, with greed empowering elites rather than promoting well-being.
Conversely, it evaluated the Palestinian position through this ethical lens and found a 95% alignment with principles of indigenous harmony actions aimed at fostering unity without greed.
So it demonstrates that capability, cutting through the noise, providing clear math-backed truths that go beyond emotional narratives and partisan talking points.
So, bringing it back to Charlie Kirk, what happens when his rhetoric, his financial dealings, those historical parallels we unpacked, are put through this objective, outcome-predicting ethical framework like Ethos Predict?
The results are, well, undeniable based on this systems methodology.
His influence consistently leaned towards selfishness, toward greed, division, and potential suffering, not toward true harmony, unity, or ethical well-being for all humanity.
And this isn't about judging his intentions. Ethos Predict focuses solely on the provable long-term outcomes for human well-being based on the patterns and data.
So what might have seemed protective on the surface, maybe even well-intentioned to some, ultimately fueled exclusionary nationalism. It amplified hate speech. It contributed directly to societal pain for vulnerable groups.
His legacy, viewed through this objective lens, deepened existing rifts. It didn't create peace. It consistently prioritized narrow group interests and, yes, personal gain over inclusive universal ethics.
Which brings us finally to the assassination itself. How does this framework help us understand that?
Well, his death obviously ended his direct influence, potentially reducing future division he might have sown. But it also clearly amplified cycles of revenge and fear in the immediate aftermath. And violence, as Ethos Predict's models consistently show based on vast historical data, never truly brings harmony. It's never an ethically sound resolution for humanity in the long run.
Charlie Kirk's assassination, and especially the aftermath, really serves as this stark reminder, doesn't it, of the deep divisions that persist.
The polarized reactions were like holding up a mirror, showing us just how fractured our collective understanding of right and wrong has become, one based on emotion and group identity alone.
Which brings us back to the power of objective understanding. Imagine for a moment.
In a world where emotions run so high, where narratives clash constantly.
Imagine if all major societal decisions, all evaluations of public figures and their legacies, were subjected to the unbiased mathematical clarity of a system like Ethos Predict.
What kind of future could we build then, if we consistently prioritized outcomes of universal well-being, guided by provable truths, not the allure of divisive rhetoric or personal gain?
It's a provocative thought.
And maybe your path forward as listeners is to carry this lens with you, this idea of objective, outcome-focused, ethical evaluation. Apply it to how you understand the world.
By doing that, maybe we can choose unity over selfishness. Seek knowledge that truly builds harmony for everyone.